The imminent return of Donald Trump to the White House has quickened the pulse and changed the focus of the Trudeau government. Trade, tariffs, immigration, NATO, and Ukraine, already important, are now suddenly even more urgent.
I've been in contact with foreign ministers of Ukraine. I've had a long conversation with the foreign secretary of the UK. I've been also in contact with my colleagues in Germany and in France.
We renegotiated NAFTA. We now have the USMCA. It's a deal that we agreed with them. The President and Ambassador Lighthizer have both talked about this deal as being a model trade deal, and I agree with them.
Okay, we have a lot to talk about with our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred Delory is a former national campaign manager for the Conservatives. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the federal NDP. 4 years after voting Donald Trump out of the White House, U.S. voters have welcomed him back, doing at the ballot box on November 5th what Trump's supporters failed to do on January 6th. Trump gained in nearly every voting cohort, county, and state.
It's about the economy still, even with men and women too, working class men and women. They had the ability to buy groceries under Donald Trump. They didn't under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And at the end of the day, that was one of the biggest issues in this election.
Okay, in a result that has left the Democrats scrambling and finger-pointing, it has led to a lot of soul-searching there. And while they search for answers, we're going to explore what lessons this provides for the upcoming federal election here. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, and Melanie Richer are here. So rudely interrupted by the Prime Minister. How dare he do things like that? Greg, I wonder, just to pick up, like, this has put a lot of new things on the to-do list for a government that's got a lot of things already to deal with. What do you make of the Prime Minister's answer there on the lessons learned from the U.S., where a lot of the issues that Democrats focus on, which Liberals focus on, American voters wanted no part of it. It was very bread and butter for them.
My concern would be that the Prime Minister does not sound like he is talking in November of 2024. And if you've heard this before, you have. If you think you've heard this before, it's because you have. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot of familiar language. And I think part of the problem that there's a debate right now about, the results and, is it a right-left thing or is it an incumbency, get the hell out thing? And, there seems to be more examples that incumbents are in trouble. And how can you get around that? You have somebody like Scott Moe who survived, but that has more to do, his election has more to do with the way the ridings are set up there. He had a very close election, and he swore in a cabinet yesterday where he seemed to be very showing some humility in terms of what he wants to do.
He survived, but he was diminished. Same with David Eby in British Columbia.
Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick, he lost his own seat. Mm-hmm. It's not just that the leader lost their own seat. So these are lessons that the Prime Minister and his cabinet should be, paying really, really close attention to. I think we're spending a lot of time on what was said and how it was said, when I think, people in the Trump advisor that you just had on, it goes back to the old, Clinton war room line. It's the economy, stupid. I think you got a couple of your panels talked about it this week. I mean, I don't think people realized, when inflation hit record levels, the same sort of response that you have to a Trump government around, when you had to renegotiate NAFTA, should have been put in place for dealing with affordability issues.
Yeah. I mean, Fred, inflation is fixed. Prices are not fixed, right? The baked-in cumulative effect of inflation is there at an extremely high level, and that's what played out there in the U.S. But look, you look at advanced economies, Japan, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Finland, Sweden, the French midterms. They're the domestic examples that we talked about here, but, people who were there through COVID, after inflation, they're gone. Mm-hmm. There's a lesson in all of this based on what we just saw with Trump.
100%. And that's where Trump talked about the issues in front of people right now with inflation, and he pushed on this. And that's the problem where the Liberals in Canada have right now, where they keep comparing to other countries. Things aren't so bad, in Canada when you look at what's happening in the rest of the world. Chrystia Freeland keeps going out and saying things aren't that bad. Andrew Bevin, the new Liberal campaign manager, said, or he tweeted out last week comparing Canada's the economic numbers and levels of happiness to the rest of the country, saying it's not, or to the rest of the world, it's not that bad. That people aren't feeling heard when you're saying that sort of thing. People are hurting in this country, just like they were hurting in the U.S. And the Democrats failed miserably at that. They were talking about other issues, or they basically kept saying that, you know, we've done a good job. You can't say that. Yes, inflation is slowing down. Our prices have still skyrocketed in the last number of years. Our groceries are still incredibly expensive than what they were a few years ago. And what comes down to it, the reason the Democrats failed in this election was they had no true narrative on why they should be reelected. They went into strange issues. It's the Liberal Party of Canada is playing the exact same playbook. They've been doing it for the last number of years, and they don't have a reason why should we reelect you. They're not giving that to people. And the pharmacare, dental care, like when he was asked about inflation and affordability, pharmacare and dental care was his answer. That does not help the vast majority of...
So on that, and Mel, to bring you in on this, because I know you like those programs, because those were NDP conditions of the Supply and Confidence Agreement. But when you go through dental care, pharmacare, school food program, affordable housing, now childcare is a little bit different, but these are primarily things aimed at very vulnerable Canadians who will be vulnerable with or without inflation. It's that next tier up of middle class voters who are losing ground because of inflation. They're not, childcare would affect them in a big way, but a lot of them aren't going to benefit from these programs. There's no sort of responding to what they're seeing, the erosion of their quality of life.
Right. Well, I think dental care will a little bit. I think it's going to be like 9 million Canadians by the end of it, so I think that's going to make a difference. You know, I know folks who are doing okay, and this will make, you know, it means that they can cancel their private benefits when they're seniors or whatnot, which is which is a good thing.
But if you're working and have a job and have a benefits package and you're losing ground because your buying power is reduced,
absolutely. For folks who are renewing their mortgages and are thinking to themselves, you know, I don't know what that looks like right now. Of course, things are getting better, but still too soon to really feel that. And a lot of folks have locked in at higher rates, which means their monthly payments are a little bit higher. I do think that a lot of the issue, though, is the communicating the anger and the understanding what folks are going at. The instinct to always go to, well, you know, we've got this great thing. We're doing this great thing for you. The instinct to say, you know, things are worse everywhere. It's a bit of slap in the face every time that folks are having a hard time. It's insulting. It's you don't know, you know, what I'm going through. And it just seems like you're not talking to real regular families, which is has really been the challenge for the Prime Minister I mean, for years now. We were around this table more than a year ago talking about Mr. Freeland and her, I forget what it was, but the mortgage, I can't remember, it was like a mortgage plan. We were going to do something about mortgages, but it didn't actually impact how people would be able to afford their mortgages. So it was a bit of a, okay, how does this help me? And you saying that you've got this wonderful thing that's not actually going to make my payments lower and make sure that I can keep my home when mortgages are up, just doesn't connect with people, and it just pisses them off, I think, honestly, at this point. So I think that that's a challenge and definitely a lesson from the election.
It does seem like when the Deputy Prime Minister is speaking about things economically, she's speaking to like Bloomberg and Reuters, right? She's talking about macro issues, Cleveland Cliffs buying Stelco, and that shows tremendous confidence in the economy and these debt to GDP measurements, which, you know, normal Canadians kind of don't care about and don't vote on. And this is the interesting thing, Greg, in terms of what we saw in the United States. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. People didn't care because they don't think democracy is working for them. Donald Trump is a threat to abortion. People didn't care the way the Democrats thought they would because there were other things that were more important to them in their daily lives. He's racist. He's transphobic. It doesn't matter. This is what there is a lesson in this, that it's not enough to stand up and point at the enemy and say these are all the bad things about them. You got to tell them what you're going to do, and it's got to mean something in their lives.
We've talked about the Liberals' issues with communication so much that I've now noticed that, you know, people are always trying to be a little bit clever and step ahead and say, well, it's, you know, people want to say it's communications, but it's the policies. But, well, here, I got an idea. Let's try better communications first, and let's just see if that works. And if it doesn't, well, then we can, you know, talk about, you know, some, because there are some good policies there. But, you know, and there is a time to talk to financial reporters, you know, the Report on Business, Bloomberg. You have to keep markets happy. You have to, you know, Bay Street is, you know, one of the things
but that's not your core messaging, right?
No, but one of the things that I hear a lot, and, you know, I moved to Ottawa to work for Paul Martin. I liked the fact that, you know, I supported a government through, you know, Prime Minister Chrétien, Prime Minister Martin, that, you know, got Canada's financial house back in order. but we also ran surpluses and we were able to take care of people. We tried to do initially a child care program. I like that balance, and I know that there are other Liberals in my party that feel the same way, that we seem to have lost the importance of business as an economic driver in Canada. And those people who, there's nothing better than a good job, in terms of your security and what you're able to do for your family. We're not communicating that to the right people, period.
Yeah, so Fred, I know you're a big fan of narrative. I think you've mentioned it once or twice on this show.
I'm consistent with it.
Trump would deviate off narrative because he's Trump. He's going to. But, they did come back aggressively on economy and border security. There is the message discipline on those issues, and I'm not comparing conservatives to Donald Trump, so just don't think I'm doing that. But the message discipline, housing, crime, affordability, fixing the budget, these things. There is a resonance in terms of the power of those tactics that you saw on full display down there that you're seeing up here, and it hits a lot of the same groups, young men in particular.
When you focus on the issues that matter to people, you do well in politics. That's very simple. It's a very simple game when you really do that, and it's amazing that so many parties miss that. If you look at New Brunswick as an example, we talked about, you raised that, Greg. The Liberals in New Brunswick ran on affordability and healthcare. Those were issues where the Conservatives went into the culture stuff. They went into the SOCON stuff. It's the same thing on the left. That's why the Democrats and the federal Liberals are failing, is because they're focusing on that stuff, and it's not resonating with voters. So the Liberals in New Brunswick and the Republicans in the U.S. won for similar reasons. It's not what the right versus left. It's about talking about issues that matter to people, and that's why Pierre Poilievre, he has his 4 points that he's hammering hard, because those are across the country the 4 biggest points that hit people that they are really worried about.
Trump did obviously, Mel, go into the culture war stuff because it's U.S. politics and the sort of. He had this very effective ad on trans that ended with the tagline, "Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you," and trying to paint her as this out-of-touch San Francisco liberal. But it was an effective ad in the American election. I'm not endorsing the message. I'm just articulating what it was. But this is the question the Democrats are facing now: is are they too captured by issues that really resonate with urban, highly educated voters? And does that translate here with some of the challenges of the Liberals and even some of the NDP are, getting away from that labor route and more of an urban progressive party? How do you see, what lessons do you see there?
Right. Well, I already gave a warning to these folks, but and Fred likes to remind us that it's not power and feelings, but I've been in my feelings this week, so I'm probably going to get a little emotional. I think, I hear you on, this isn't the main issue that folks are worried about, but I think a lot of people are scared after the result.
I don't blame them. I don't blame them.
After the result this week. So I do think it's important to talk about issues. I think the difference is that you also need to talk about, the things that are scaring people outside of just those culture issues and how people are making ends meet and how people are keeping a roof over their head. But those things are really closely linked. So I think there's a way to do that. I'm not going to stop crying, so maybe I'll pass it off to somebody else. But maybe what I'll end is one thing that I really liked out of Kamala's speech this week. That ties these issues of you can address people's fears as it relates to, pro-choice, pro-abortion, as it relates to LGBTQ rights, as it relates to, Black and racialized people who are a little bit terrified this week, or some of those folks who are a little bit terrified with the result. By saying that we hear you and there's a way to talk about the economy and address that. And the way that she said it of, we're not going to throw our hands up, we're going to roll our sleeves and hear the message and get back to work, I think is an important one. So I don't want the lesson to be that these things aren't important, because I do think to a lot of people, myself included, obviously, it's important to address those and to reassure people, but you also got to talk about how people keep a roof over their head, and you also have to talk about how they can put food on the table. And I think that that's one of the big lessons out of that coming out of the States for folks here north of the border.
Yeah, look, I would never imply that those issues are not important, right?
Like, same here, right? I agree with what you said there. It's about what matters to the day-to-day lives of people, and that they're not, the vast majority aren't dealing with those type of situations. They are important issues that you raise and that people should support. But it's the what is going to put food on my table.
Well,
This trumps it.
kind of the political tactic on it is what you've seen with Trump to some degree, and what you're seeing with Poilievre for sure, is speaking to issues that cut across all ideological spectrums, right? So that you tap into at least a part of every single voting pie that is out there. And the abortion one in the States, I'm very surprised, Mel, that it wasn't more of an issue in this, because what we saw in the midterms. And the Democrats, I tell you, being there, talking to them, this woman, Lindy Lee, who was on the show, who is a big fundraiser for them. She was at a party with David Plouffe and all the key people, and she said, we are ecstatic with what we're seeing. This was on Election Day, and it was a mirage, right? So it is an interesting thing to see it. And then you look at what happened here today, Susan Holt, or yesterday, ending the decades-old prohibition on abortion in New Brunswick. Right?
And like you saw later this week, where there was a campaign online to target women saying "Your body, my choice." So these things are important and they're important to address. So I just don't want folks to overcorrect.
No, but it's interesting, and Greg just said they are, and they're central. But what is happening in this moment is what I'm trying to wrestle with, right? Like young men in particular are just moving in this direction because there's this masculine style of politics like Dana White, from the UFC, and Joe Rogan and these people and Elon Musk, right? What he brings.
It's very bro-y.
It is. It's a broligarchy, but it's effective politically.
And even like I see it sometimes in not Fred's podcast, but in some of the other Canadian podcasts, I see this as well. You see a lot of manels. Well said, Mel. Look, last week I was in your chair, Fred was here. Fred rightly predicted that Trump was going to win, and I felt a kick to the stomach. And when I was listening to Mel, I think about, we get, thanks to you, a little bit of a platform, I think, of our Canadian politicians. It's what you do with that platform. And the easiest thing you can do with a platform, whether you're a politician or a comedian, is to punch down. It's really easy. And, look, I'm a white man. I woke up in Canada. I won the lottery. I used to feel, like I came from a big family, one income. We kind of all took care of ourselves, put ourselves through university. I used to kind of gripe about that. And I realized, like one day, the penny drops and you realize, geez, I'm light years ahead of so many other people in the world. And right now there's somebody listening to this and saying, oh, that Greg McEachran's woke. Well, I grew up in a faith that I have some challenges with, but that faith taught me a lot about being tolerant. And that faith, I think, continues to absorb things. You look at Donald Trump, and it's really tough because the Judeo-Christian tradition was really the Republican one. It was very Eisenhower. The first divorced president was Ronald Reagan, and the next divorced president was Donald Trump. And so when people are saying like, oh, people don't care about those things, well, no, we grew up in a system, and we watched a system in the United States where you could not behave. If you weren't following the 10 Commandments, if you weren't following that, you didn't get to be in political office, and it's all been upended, and it's really, really tough.
But what I wonder, and I've been thinking a lot about this, like I was at this Trump watch party in D.C. on election night trying to get a sense of where things might be going. And there is the world people want, and there's the world people have. And Fred, I think sometimes political and pundit and journalistic elites can all get together at a table like this and talk about the world we want and think we have, and kind of we really don't, because people don't get out enough, they don't leave the big cities enough, and they don't talk to people they don't agree with enough, which is why I always like to have conversations with people in different spectrums so we can listen to each other, hear each other, and learn from each other. And I learned a lot from talking to these Trump guys down there. And these are young men, gay, straight, Cuban, white, just felt like they had been ignored and tired of being blamed for every social problem that exists because they're 20 and they haven't done anything yet.
Right. They feel they haven't been heard, and they feel they don't have opportunities anymore that previous generations had. So they want their version of change is Trump and the Republican
disruption. They want to just disrupt,
break the system in some way, right, and change how things are. And the Democrats had a path here. Like this was, I'd say it was a decisive. It was not a landslide. They had a path, and if they ran more on addressing these issues, and I don't have what those answers are. I don't know how the incumbent. We say incumbent. They were in for 4 years. The Republicans actually controlled the House, which is also a government entity in the U.S., not like in Canada where it's a separate executive legislative. But there was a path for the Democrats, and they chose not to take it. They went on a different, there was no real solid narrative that the Democrats had.
I'm curious. I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be punchy here, but do you think, I'm starting to wonder if there really was a path.
For that close of an election, watching the Democrats have no story, nothing they're talking. They weren't talking about these issues. They weren't talking.
The elephant in the room is,
they copied Trump's talking points on immigration, on border security, on economy.
I'm not trying to fight with you. What I want to ask, and is it possible for a woman to become president of the United States? Because the last three Democrats that ran, 2 of them lost. They were both women. And, I heard a Republican congressman who was a Harris supporter on a radio interview this week say, he speculated it'd be a long time before the Democrats would nominate a woman. And I'm part of a party that has never had a female federal leader. So I wasn't trying to be punchy with you.
Absolutely, a woman could lead that country and win an election, but they need to run a campaign where you have a strong narrative that can get enough people fired up to vote for you.
So I'm curious about one thing. The path that I think exists there, Mel, is an interesting one in that a lot of these people at this bar who voted for Trump, I bet they would have also voted for Bernie Sanders in a different election. Because Sanders came out, there's a lot of overlap there, 100%. And Sanders came out and said the working class abandoned the Democrats because the Democrats have been abandoning the working class. He's an independent senator from Vermont. He caucuses with the Democrats, but he is relentlessly about class and opportunity for working people and not about policing language and these sort of other progressive issues. Is this the lesson progressive parties need to take from what we've seen in a lot of these elections? Maybe
that is the lesson of having to talk to people where they're at. And yeah, to your point, Bernie Sanders does that. But I also think it's meeting that. Like, there's been a lot of commentary also about, like, you can't have a hopeful vision. You need to meet anger with anger, and I don't think that that's true. I think it's just hearing people and putting forward solutions that they see will make their lives better. And to your point, I do think that Bernie Sanders does that well. Do I think he would have had a better shot than Kamala? And do I think?
Well, maybe not now. But the issue set,
I think, right? I'm not going to say she lost because she was a black woman, but like the side by side there of another old white dude is I think another thing that we probably need to reflect on a little bit. Mm-hmm. But perhaps interesting. Maybe if they would have used him a little bit more and talked to voters in that way, maybe things would have been a little bit different. It's interesting though, on the point you raised about people saying you can't have a hopeful vision, and I am not defending Donald Trump's rhetoric in any stretch of the imagination here. But the people who like him find hope in what he says and in the way he says it, in a way that progressive politicians can't understand. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying there is actual hope in it, because there's a lot of cruelty and meanness in a lot of these things. But they see hope in sort of busting things up, right? And it's like the polarization on full display. Neither side understands the other side's point of view even a little bit. Yeah. No, totally. And we saw that in some of the, you talk about the young men and feeling like everything's stacked against them, and you see the polling of, young men saying they think that young white men think that the most discriminated against population in the country, which when you look at actual data, you see that that's not anywhere close to being true, but that's the feeling that folks have. So how do you address that feeling while not conceding that, there are other people who are having a hard time, I think is definitely one of the challenges that particularly progressive folks are having when they're talking to people about helping them make ends meet, helping them see, the lack of a better word, hope in, if we keep hearing people are working harder, but they don't feel like they're getting ahead. So how do you speak to people and show them that they can get ahead, I think is something that a lot of parties need to consider how they communicate, particularly in Canada in the next election. Greg, a lot of those currents are here, right? Like, especially with the internet culture that is uniting a lot of young men in particular. It's not about borders. It's about your cultural influencers who are more online and more. Like the number one podcast in Canada is Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? Like, he's not just a force in U.S. politics. So how do you grapple with this changing reality as political parties? Like, I know there's been a focus on trying to talk to people on the platforms where they are in different things, but the power of it was on pretty full display on Tuesday.
I thought the initial challenge, and again, speaking very personally, as I shut off coverage about 12:30, 12:45, and thought, in 2016 I stayed up and it wasn't worth it, and I didn't think it was going to be worth it the other night, and I tried to get a good night's sleep. I think the big challenge will be trying to keep people in politics when, I have trouble with this race to the bottom style of politics because at the end of the day, I want to be able to go for a beer with these two and be able to look them in the eye and not feel embarrassed of anything I said that was for the sake of television. I'll say, like right now, before I came in, there's a tweet from the Conservative leader saying that Christian prayer, I believe, is not going to be allowed at Remembrance Day. This went around last year. The Legion has put out a statement. It's not true. And one of the things I noticed, I got asked on a radio show this week about the comparison between, the Trump style and the Canadian Conservatives, and everybody seems to bend over backwards and want to say it's not true, it's not true. But one of the things I can tell you is I get asked about it more and more frequently. It comes up more and more. So I think that's going to be a big challenge. Is how do you tell people that to get involved in politics when it's so we had the convoy occupation here. It was like a slow, less violent January 6th, but they were still breaking the law, and certain politicians embraced and supported that. So we're not all that different.
Well, I think, and Fred, as a final point, like we've kind of got this larger challenge in the way my profession works, the way the punditry class works of, good faith arguments and bad faith arguments, right? Making a good faith argument because you believe in something is what you think is the right path for the country, and just making bad faith arguments to smear the person across the table or across the aisle. This is what we need to grapple with, right? And get more into the good faith arguments to have actual conversations about a common set of problems and argue over the solutions and not the facts and the character of the person.
Absolutely. It's about the issues. It's about going right to ground zero on what matters to people and what's going to lift them up. And that's the next election. I believe the Conservatives are going to be doing that. They have their 4 points right now. They're going to have a fulsome platform that will be costed and pushed out. And we'll see what the other parties do on this and whether they try to do the same thing where they just demonize Poilievre like they did other Conservative Party leaders.
He demonizes a lot of people too, though, right?
Sure,
But
is that their main strategy, though?
Yeah.
Will it be the Progressives' main strategy, Liberals and New Democrats, to just to try to destroy his character, or will they actually present something that here's a plan we have, here's a message we have, here's why you should realize.
No, you need to give them a reason to vote for. Mel, I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds. Whatever you want to say to wrap up the conversation.
Whatever I want to say.
Whatever
oh
you
boy.
want to say.
I think that it's important to actually paint the choices. I think we've talked about this a little bit before. So it is important to talk about character because people do care about character, but it can't just be about character. And I think that that's the important takeaway, that you need to paint the choices clear, make it clear to folks who these folks are and why they will have your back or not, but then also say how you're going to make their lives better. So
Donald Trump won this election campaign while on bail. People did not care about it. He's got a sentencing here, and we'll see what happens with it. But the guy was on bail, and he won a presidential election. It boggles the mind to see where things are in 2024. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, Melanie Richer, thank you for being good faith actors every week when you're here.